Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and I'm here today to talk to you about my best and worst reads of 2021. If you've never seen one of these videos from me before, I do this a little bit differently. I read a lot of books. I read 230 in 2021. So instead of ranking that many books, which is a thing I don't think I would be very good at, I go back month by month by month and let you know what was the best thing that I read in that month and what was the worst thing I read in that month. I like this because it's kind of a fun way to reflect on the year that I had, even though it might not be completely accurate as to the absolute worst things that I've read, because sometimes I read a 3-star book as my worst thing in a month, so we'll see what happened. I also like to do it this way because previous Kathy has already done all the work. I already wrote out these lists, I left them in my Google Docs, and I get to go back to them, look at them, and remember. Additionally, it is a very rainy, gross, grey, disgusting day on the west coast of Canada, so I apologize if that reflects in what you're seeing right now, because I try to work with natural light and it's not working with me today, so we're gonna see how this goes. Alright, in January we had the first DNF of the year. I only had 2 of them, so I don't feel comfortable putting a DNF as the worst thing I read in a month because I only read probably about 30 pages of this book, but I'll mention it and then go on to the next book as well. That DNF was Teaching a Stone to Talk by Annie Dillard. That is in here somewhere. There we go. I only knew I had this because this is one of the books from the Life's Library book club, and sometimes I like the books and sometimes I don't, and that's perfectly fine. All the money goes to charities, so I'm cool with it. This is kind of a book of her essays, and I just really didn't like the writing style, so I stopped reading it. However, the worst thing I read this month was a 2.5-star book, and I'm gonna grab it for you because I know where it is. That would be Scavenger Hunt by Christopher Pike. Christopher Pike is an author I read a lot of in my teen years. I loved horror as a kid. My very first email address was horrorflickchick@hotmail.com. So when I remembered this author existed, I ordered about 10 or 15 of these books off Thrift Books. Some of them came in not great condition, but also what's inside is kind of garbage as well. This goes from being a scavenger hunt that the senior class is doing to some weird ritual. The details are a little bit hazy because I literally read it a year ago, but needless to say, I didn't think it was great. My favorite thing that I read in January was Hench. This book was fantastic. If you're a fan of superhero books or anti-hero books, this one is for you. This one is about somebody who works as a hench person, so they are kind of the underling to a super villain. And even though she mostly works in data management, she gets injured on the job but doesn't really get anything to compensate her for that. So she starts kind of working out what the cost of having heroes in her city is and how that's actually affected everybody's lives. I thought this was an incredibly interesting take. I don't have a copy though because I believe I listened to it as an audiobook. Alright, moving on to my February document. My lowest rated read for February was 2.5 stars, and that was a short story called Hello Moto by Nnedi Okorafor. This one just didn't really work for me. I wanted more out of it. I just wanted to know more about the technology that was being talked about in it, but I am glad I picked it up. I picked it up for the Demonathon. I believe it was a group read of some persuasion, but it was just too short for me. I had a lot of unanswered questions. My favorite book that I read in February was Roman and Jewel. This is a reimagining of Romeo and Juliet, except for that play is getting the Hamilton treatment and we're following people who are in that production. If you know me, you know I love theater and I love theater books, so this one was an obvious pick for me. Moving on to March, my lowest 3-star book that month was called The Bass Rock, and do I remember anything from this book? I absolutely do not. I remember it had a cover that I think kind of maybe had a bit of a mermaid on it. You're looking at it right now, so you tell me, does it? I don't know. Kind of a mermaid fish type of theme. I remember nothing from this book. My favorite book that month, however, was a book of essays called A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. This was a phenomenal read. This was all essays by an Indigenous author. I believe she grew up in Canada, but she had family in the States, or vice versa. I can't remember. But this had to do with generational trauma upbringing. Honestly, I need to read this one again. I believe the Feminist AF book club is actually reading this at some point this year, so if you haven't read it before, you should join them for that. In April, my birth month, let's see what I didn't like. Okay, so it was another 3-star, so I liked it, but it wasn't my favorite thing of the month, obviously, because everything else I read I liked more. It was Sheets. This is a graphic novel about ghosts, and that's really all I can explain about it. It kind of has these 2 different things that seem like they're completely different, and then eventually they converge together. One is this person who has become a ghost, and in the ghost realm they just look like they have sheets. Like the classic Halloween sheets that you see that people use when they want to be a ghost for Halloween. And then in the other storyline we have this girl, I believe her mother might have either died or left them. Her father is very depressed and she is trying to run their family laundry, but somebody is trying to buy the land so they can do something else with it. And then of course eventually these characters meet. Like I said, this was a 3-star read, so I didn't hate it, it just was not my favorite thing I read that month. However, what I did love that month was The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This was a book filled with both lovable characters and whimsy, and that combination really, really works for me. I do want to mention that because the premise of this book has to do with a magical orphanage, T.J. Klune was doing research while writing the book about orphanages and then happened to learn about the 60s scoop. And then when he brought that up in an interview, people decided that he had appropriated that horrible history into this book. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not here to say it is, and I'm not here to say it isn't. However, I am here to listen to minority communities when they bring up hurts like this, and I can't stand here and say that if he did that, that was okay. That is not my place. However, finding out about that interview later in the year definitely made me worried about putting this on any form of favorites list. But since this is the format of how I do my lists, this is just honesty. In May, we have another 3-star read as my least favorite. What the heck was going on? I'm really good at picking things that I know I'm probably going to enjoy. That's what's going on. This was another graphic novel called Dead Endia, and I remember it being queer. I remember there's trans characters. I don't remember much more besides that there were possibly portals. I remember I enjoyed the art style, but obviously the plot didn't really stick with me. My favorite book that month was Ace by Angela Chen. I actually have a copy of that coming to me because I need a hard copy to live in my house. As somebody who falls on the A spectrum, this was a very important read for me. In fact, half the reason I'm getting a copy is because my partner also wants to read it. The other half is because I found it in a queer book box from the world's oldest gay bookshop, so I'm very excited to have a membership to that. In June, my 2-star read was Orlando. I just really did not get on with this, and I didn't see the point of this book. And every time I read a classic, I'm really scared that people are gonna come for me in the comments being like, how could you not understand how brilliant this book is? It just wasn't for me. That's it. I didn't like it. My favorite book that month was Crosshairs by Catherine Hernandez. This takes place in a dystopian Toronto, and it has to do with the criminalization of LGBT folks, them being driven underground, and then people trying to have a revolution because the rest of the world doesn't know that Canada is actually being terrible to queer folk. Talking about this right now is kind of timely because I believe it was 2 or 3 days ago I saw on Instagram, of all places, that Canada has finally banned conversion therapy, and I said to myself, you mean it wasn't already banned? What the hell? In July, another 3-star read, Mostly Dead Things. Didn't really care for this. The plot didn't really seem to go very far. It just wasn't for me. I feel like I'm gonna say that about most of the things at the bottom of my list, but it just wasn't for me. My favorite thing I read that month, however, was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. In fact, that is the only one that I do not have of her books, because I listened to it as an audiobook from the library, or an ebook. I can't remember which one, but that is the one I am missing from my collection. This one is told in an unusual format. We kind of get the whole backstory and the saga of this family, and then we get them in present day at a party, and then from there we see little bits of flashbacks to try to figure out what's going on at this pivotal moment in their lives. Doesn't work for everyone, but it worked for me. In August, I had my other DNF of the year. That was Magic by Mike Russell. I actually still have the copy of it. Right here. I got a total of 22 pages into it, and it just wasn't really for me. It started out as an origin story of how the universe existed by a magician kind of making that happen, and I just really didn't enjoy the writing style, and then I put it down, picked up something else, and was never drawn to pick it back up, so I just never did. However, because I didn't finish it, I don't feel like I can really slate it in as my least favorite. So my least favorite was a 3-star slice of life graphic novel called What If We Were. My camera just stopped recording, and usually it beeps when it does that, but I don't think it did it that time, so I have to go back and re-record some things. What If We Were concerns these two best friends that kind of have this game where they play what if we were scientists, or what if we were superheroes, and they basically just talk out that situation. It is a very fun character study because these characters are very different even though they are best friends, so it's fun from that. It's kind of like the conversations you would have with your own best friend, but there wasn't really a narrative arc to it, and I find that's something that I personally need to like things more than 3 stars. My 5-star for the month was Dial A for Aunties. This is about a girl who goes on a blind date with a guy, accidentally kills him and then has to recruit her mom and aunties to help cover it up. And they all work together running weddings, so that's a fun time. I love a ridiculous situation with hilarious characters. This is a very funny black comedy. In September, my least favorite thing was 3.5 stars, so you can tell that was a good reading month, and that was Bonker Doesn't Die. This isn't even a piece of fiction that you can actually buy anywhere because it was a perk for the project for Awesome. This is a short story that was a scene that was actually cut from the Carl's duology, which is an absolutely remarkable thing and a beautifully foolish endeavor by Hank Green. This is where April May went to VidCon and then solved a pet crime because she used to be a pet detective. Obviously, I still very much enjoyed it. How I kind of order my 5 stars is if I do a reread that month of a 5-star book, that goes at the beginning of my 5 stars, so anything else that I read that month that was also a 5-star that I read for the first time can be my favorite thing that month. However, I read 3 5-star books this month, and all of them were rereads. First one was an absolutely remarkable thing, the second one was a beautifully foolish endeavor, and the third one, and my favorite from this list, is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is a contemporary book with sci-fi elements about this girl who moves to New York City, has a crush on this girl that she always sees on one of the trains, and then comes to realize that that girl is actually stuck there and has been stuck there since the 1970s. I will read absolutely everything this author puts out. I already have an arc of their next book, and I am very excited to get to it. In October, my least favorite book was another 3-star read, and that was Eight Will Fall. This is a fantasy book about these people that have special powers, and because of that, the queen is sending them on this trip into a cave to find a king that maybe is a myth, maybe isn't, and then people start dying because it's called Eight Will Fall. I thought I was going to like this a lot more because it primarily takes place in this cave, and I used to be a cave tour guide, so I thought that was going to be kind of interesting, but overall this was just kind of meh for me. However, I really loved A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This one is sapphic and dark academia and mystery, all set at a prestigious boarding school. I had a very good time listening to this one. In November, my 2-star read was The Death of an Owl. I did not like this book. I really liked that it was started by a father and his son actually finished it because his father died while he was writing it. I was like, oh, that's really sweet, that's really interesting, but I ended up hating this book. Essentially, the first third of this book or so just didn't need to happen. It was just a lot of backstory, and it took us 120 pages or so to get to the titular event and then the fallout from that, and I just hated reading it. If I wasn't reading it for a reading vlog, which I will link down below, I probably would have stopped reading it. My favorite book of the month, however, and a book that I would love to reread and also watch all of the movies referenced, is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This was fantastic. It's all about this girl who's kind of a high school outcast, and she absolutely loves the slasher genre, so she knows everything about these old slasher movies, up until the new ones, of course. And after a self-harm event takes her away from her town for a while, she comes back and she seems to think that she is now in a slasher film. All of these elements are just falling into place, and there's this new final girl that has just come to town, and she's trying to figure out what the mystery is to figure out who the slasher is. Again, I mentioned earlier, I loved horror movies, especially as a kid. I still love horror movies, and this really worked for me. As for December, sadly, I didn't really like Cobalt Blue. I gave it 2.5 stars. This one is about 2 people in India who both fall in love with the same guy. It's told from the brother's perspective, and it's told in second person in his perspective because he's talking to that lover, and it's told in the sister's perspective when she starts writing letters about her time with that lover. This was another one where overall I just kind of really didn't get the point. I got really excited about watching the movie because I heard that it was coming out that week, and you would think that when Netflix produces a movie they would put it out in all of the countries that it operates in at the same time, but that was not the case. It came out, I believe, in India, and I don't know when or if it's coming to Canada. However, the author of this book is also a movie director, and he directed his own book's movies, so I found that interesting. My favorite book of December was Firekeeper's Daughter. This was such a compelling listen. I loved this audiobook. Our main character in this one is mixed race. She's indigenous and white, and she's the victim of a lot of backlash from both of her communities because of this. That being said, she is obviously loved by her family on both sides, but each side is mad about the other side existing. She's also very much into the hockey scene because she used to be a hockey player, her father was a famous hockey player, and her brother is still on a team, so when this new guy comes to town, he asks her to kind of show him around. She takes him to a party one one night so he can meet a bunch of people, and then something happens in that party that drastically changes the course of her life. Here's the thing with this book, I didn't know anything about it going into it. I just knew that it was highly rated and people were absolutely raving about it, so I was like, I will read whatever this is, I don't need to know anything. And I'm not going to tell you what the twist about 3 hours into a 14-hour audiobook is. However, from there, it very much does turn into a mystery and trying to solve that mystery, and I just obviously very much enjoyed this. I feel like this whole video is just me going, this didn't work for me, or I very much enjoyed this. Like, those are my two modes in this video. And there you have it. What were your best and worst books of the year? Let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving me a comment, but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!